underneath those. Thank you so much, Rachel, for that. So the first was around who must meet the literacy requirements for the license. And we talked about this actually. It didn't need to be a long conversation because every time we've landed on this question, there has been a universal agreement that it really needs to apply to all of the groups of teachers who are receiving licenses and working with our elementary students, and also to educators with special licenses, including administrators who are working with elementary students. We also understand the council to wish for that to include not just newly licensed teachers, which of course, newly licensed in Oregon teachers, which of course is the target audience for these standards, but also for out of state and for currently licensed teachers as well. In addition, we talked about the need for or the desire for some statement from the council to include a recommendation to TSPC to continue to work with the Educator Advancement Council and the Department of Education around clarity for administrative standards. Because although we do reference administrators in the standards that are being recommended by the council at this time, we also know that they don't necessarily capture the entirety of what specialized knowledge administrators will need to have in order to create the conditions for our educators, our classroom educators, to be able to do the work. For example, many times in administrative programs, if you are studying and know you're going to focus on secondary education, you take a specialized course around master scheduling so that you understand how to fit all of those courses together into a schedule. Elementary administrators historically have not necessarily needed that skill, but currently they do now, as they are creating pretty complex schedules to meet the needs of students as they are learning to read. So that would be an example of an expectation competency we'd want to address through those standards. In addition, really talking about with those among the same three groups, the Department of Ed and EAC as a part of the Department of Ed, and then TSPC, developing the process for the competency demonstration for all of those candidates who are coming from out of state or who are currently licensed. So that work still will need to be done after the work of the council is completed. So are there any questions around? I think I'll go question by question just so we can quickly capture that. And I'm going to defer to you, to the co-chairs, to call on people because I can't see people from my phone. Okay. So the next question was, when must educators show this competency? Is it right as they receive their first license, or can it be later? And when must folks graduating from EPP programs demonstrate this? And the recommendation is for that to occur in June of 2027. So when graduates are completing their final term in 2027, they should be able to demonstrate this competency around literacy. And then there's a footnote there that you are welcome to read, talking about renewals and the complexity of providing the instruction and supports for folks who are going in to get their renewals, and whether we continue to time that in 2027 or not. That likely will be a conversation that the commission will be considering, knowing that the council is recommending that all educators who are working with elementary students understand these standards. There's also the very real challenge of ensuring that the supports needed for school districts and ESDs and all of the partners who may be working to get educators that knowledge and background while they're teaching full time. That may take our educators a bit longer to develop that expertise than if they were in a full-time program like our current adult students are as they're learning to become educators. So that's a discussion that the commission will be having. Let me scroll on that. Thank you so much. I don't see questions, so I'm going to keep going. The third question was, what evidence should TSPC accept for educators? And this was a really rich conversation around the role of assessment. And I would say that in our conversation in June, there was not universal agreement around what should be required for demonstration of this competency. We really ranged in discussion from, should we simply trust the educator preparation programs, who are the experts in their field, to do the work and be able to assess and understand whether or not graduates have achieved those competencies at the time that they complete the program at the EPP, to every student, every educator must take and meet the standards on meet the performance results for a standardized assessment. And so we discussed things a little bit in a little bit finer detail, and talked about the fact that we do have some states that are ahead of us in implementation, who have shown a nice variety of ways for educators to show their expertise in this area. And we also discussed, however, that the role of a standardized assessment is important and can't be ignored, in that it is a faster way for a large number of educators to demonstrate their competency for the agency, in this case TSPC, to be able to then grant licensure based on that demonstration of competency. The caveat to that is that we know that a number of our educators may experience challenges within assessments that have embedded inherent bias in the way that the assessments have been created and the construct of the assessments. So what we don't want to do is put Oregon in a situation where we are missing out on some really fantastic teachers who are bringing a broad base of experience, cultural, linguistic, et cetera, into the classroom. We don't want to be so reliant upon a standardized assessment that we miss excellent educators because of how we've built the system. So the end recommendation is to have multiple ways of demonstrating, and but to have a standardized assessment that certainly is a part of that process and can be used as demonstration for most of our candidates. Another recommendation that came out of this, and you'll see it down on, if I'm counting correctly quickly, the fifth and sixth bullets, is around the recommendation to support TSPC's data system development, what is included in the data system. So the data that we are capturing related to competency of educators. And then also that the system itself is funded in order to actually work well for our licensees, and so that they have clarity around those licensing requirements as they move forward with renewals. And we currently have resources for our educator data system, as we've talked about before. We are anticipating in August or September moving forward with an RFQ for vendors. And the hope is that by the end of June, we would be able to put in place that data system. Because of the timing of that hope, we are a little concerned about crossing over into the next biennium on that data system. And so there are conversations as we are considering the complexity of what we need the system to be able to do. There are considerations around ensuring financial support continues for the data system development and for putting in place across the biennium if that is needed, and also that the resources are there to be able to support the complexity of the work. I will say that it's important on that third from the bottom bullet to note that the Educator Advancement Council has been charged by the legislature to develop a data system that tracks professional development for teachers. And we are in conversation across agencies related to the various data systems that we have in place and which data should be housed where. So it is possible that instead of TSPC being the place where the methods of demonstration are captured, that we would simply be able to use some of the Educator Advancement Council data that they're collecting around professional learning and growth to use that as proof for receiving their licensure for demonstrating competency. And then the last piece was definitely a strong agreement across the group on June 7th, which is this ongoing desire to lower current costs, at least stabilize, but potentially lower current costs for educators related to all of their licensing requirements. That the recommendation of that group and the recommendation to the council is that the council itself recommend that the assessment be free to Oregon educators. So whatever our future educators or current educators are using to demonstrate this expertise and literacy, that part of this process be free to educators. And for that to occur, we would need a legislative action to ensure that happened. So number 4, that question is, do we have questions? I'm so sorry about 3.
There's one question. Yes, Senator Dembrow.
Yeah, thank you. And I do hope we get back to the discussion of funding and the need for funding.
I think I see Senator Dembrow.
Yeah, am I not speaking? Can you not hear me? You do hear me. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you,
okay.
Senator Dembrow.
Yeah. Hey, Melissa. I do hope we can get back to the discussion of funding, because I think it's critical, not only here for the professional development part, but also for the needs of the EPPs. But my question was going to be around the role of student teaching and internships, as ways to potentially demonstrate knowledge and competence. I'm not saying this is an either or, but it just seems like that there would be a role to play there, and potentially one that would help us to bring the EPPs and the school districts in tighter alignment and relationship, which I think is part of what we're hoping for here.
I think the demonstration of content knowledge, we are going to need to have multiple ways of capturing that and being able to verify. The challenge is that what we trust of our EPP, how we trust our EPPs and their opinion and perspective around content knowledge expertise should be in alignment with how we trust our K-12 schools or ESDs as well. So if this apprenticeship and what we've thought of as student teaching, but I'm preferring clinical practice as the language right now. I think that is a missing piece for consideration for us to really well define. We didn't discuss that in particular on June 7th, and that I can recall. However, I appreciate you bringing it up, because I do believe, especially given where we are with apprenticeships after finishing up our first year, that we are going to need to have that be a part of the pathway.
Looks like we have a question from Rep. Wright.
Yes, thank you. This hasn't been brought up before that I remember specifically, but as we're talking about legislative action concerning funding for free participation by Oregon educators, I think we need to also think about substitutes. That they need to be brought along the line and have the opportunity to take some training if it's available. We have a very terrible shortage of substitutes wanting to teach, and we need to help in the classrooms, and we need to make those available as much as we can. So just a thought. Thank you.
Right. I really appreciate that statement. And we know that our substitutes are not included in professional learning and growth in the way that would be ideal for our students when they walk into the classroom. We also know that even those school districts who do include the substitutes in training oftentimes are doing so where they offer the substitutes that the subs can volunteer their time to come and get training, and the training itself will be free to them. And I think that is part of the challenge because the substitute could be teaching that 8-hour day and receiving money for that 8 hours. And so how do we do that balance without the professional development of substitutes being so burdensome to an individual school district? I think that's a conversation that certainly needs to continue.
And I look forward to that conversation and working with other legislators and making sure that we get the funding we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Rachel. So we're moving on to number 4, which is how would we handle the new requirements for educators who are coming from out of state, particularly those who are coming from the states that are part of the ITMC or the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact. And so for folks who are coming from states other than the ITMC states, we can use the same methodologies for them to demonstrate their competencies. So whatever map we put forth for Oregon trained educators, we should be able to also use for out-of-state educators. Where it gets more complex is this agreement with the ITMC. And the original concept of the ITMC was a free ability for a teacher to move from one state to another state without having to jump through any additional requirements in order to have an equivalent license in that second state. The challenge with that in this circumstance is that we feel it's very important for all Oregon elementary educators to really understand literacy in the ways that have been defined through this council's work and what will be recommended to the commission. And that just simply is not true for all of the states that are part of the ITMC. So what we discussed were 2 different recommendations. TSPC is recommending that we advocate. Our licensing director, Elizabeth Keller, is on the steering committee for the ITMC. So that she advocate either for aligned literacy content knowledge requirements that are aligned with our requirements for all of the participating states in the ITMC, or if not, if we are unable to move the ITMC to that place, which is the preferred place, I think we all agree that would be the preferred place, that Oregon be given an exception or an exemption from that ITMC agreement so that we can, in fact, require those educators to demonstrate that competency. We could, of course, be in conversation at that level with giving a 3-year time period for folks who are coming in from out of state so they could have an equivalent license for that first 3 years, and that during that 3-year period they would need to develop that competency. But we aren't at the stage yet in the conversations across those collaborating states to even begin that discussion. So it's hard to know exactly what that will look like, but the discussion on June 7th was very much that ideally everybody would be agreeing to align literacy standards. And if not, that Oregon would need a backup plan.
Senator Dembro?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really sorry I wasn't able to participate in that June 7th call. I was listening to it, but I was on the road and I couldn't get in. But I just want to remind you, I'm not sure that the second bullet is really necessary because, if you look at Senate Bill 279, which is what authorized our participation in the Interstate Compact, we do have a very clear provision there. And actually, I think it came from boilerplate from the compact that I'll just read it. When a teacher is required to renew a license received pursuant to this compact, the state granting such a license may require the teacher to complete state-specific requirements as a condition of licensure renewal or advancement in that state. So I think it's inherent and we certainly talked about it as we were talking about joining the compact and passing this legislation that there would be Oregon-specific content, perhaps around ethnic studies, or I don't know if we were talking specifically about reading and literacy at that point, but it was always envisioned, and I think it's going to be true for all the states. But I do like the idea of promoting that these similar standards be adopted be made part of the compact. That would be great, I think.
Thank you, Senator Dembro. And I appreciate you sharing both the language and the legislative intent. The challenge would not be, as you've shared, with the upon renewal language. If we decided to say that, I think it is the receipt language. So, because the earlier language or the language in the ITMC agreement itself states that an equivalent license must be granted upon transfer, that I think right now with the way it's built, that the only avenue we would have is the renewal time period. So which would be 3 or 5 years, depending on whether they were on a preliminary or professional license. And so that actually is a little bit misstated here, but yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? The whole reason it's being developed is so people aren't giving a bunch of exceptions every time and creating a challenge. But I think if the council is comfortable with the upon renewal time period, that will really help TSPC in working with the ITMC, because it would naturally give more time to folks who are moving in. Right. Thank you.
Okay. So based on those discussions that Interim Executive Director Goff shared, that we talked about last month and during that last optional session, you received some draft recommendations that you could review, and we are going to discuss those in breakouts. So we'll move into those breakouts and then come back to the full group for review. So just a reminder of those questions: who must meet the literacy requirements in their license and endorsement areas that we identified? At which point must they meet the requirements? What evidence does the council recommend that TSBC accept for Oregon teacher prep pre-service educators to show that they have those competencies? And then how would we handle new requirements for educators who are coming to Oregon from out of state or out of state EPPs? So those are the questions we need to discuss. And Rachel, I can't remember how long we have in breakouts this time.
We've got about 20 minutes, and then we'll check in with each breakout. If we need some more time, we can definitely add that in as well.
Great, thank you.
All right, we are back. Okay, so we had our two groups who were going to report out. We'll give you each about 5 minutes to do so before we start thinking about a 5 formal vote. So, group one, I actually don't even know which group I was in. Were we in group one? I was in two. Okay, thank you. So group one, let's share.
We did not have enough time to land someone to share out, but co-chair Fritz has unmuted, so perhaps you're volunteering.
I was going to volunteer you since you took notes.
Fair enough. Happy to do so, but please do chime in as yeah, I'll do the best I can. So if I miss anything, rich discussion, of course, around the first recommendation, a lot of consensus around that first question, those set of recommendations, rather, around these requirements applying to all groups. A few recommendations around wording in A to elevate the fact that this pertains to some teachers and all administrators. So some recommendations there. And just noting that that of particular importance that when a high school educator becomes an elementary school administrator, that is a big lift and something not to be taken lightly. And so just elevating the importance of that notion. Around the second question, in terms of at which point licensure must educators meet the requirements, some recommendations to include those seeking initial licensure outside of Oregon in that language, and also a discussion around limitations, like what does that mean? Essentially, where like if there's no funding, what's the plan B? What might timelines look like? And also requests around some cost estimates around this, which there was some discussion around that forthcoming as part of the conversation of moving the work forward. Question 3, around evidence, some interest in learning more around how other professions look to or manage alternatives to standardized testing. This idea that teachers are professionals and we want to follow that lead and how to handle that issue. And a difference in the teaching profession around in many other professions, medicine, law, where there's an early investment, usually personally for those pursuing that career, that is paid back in average salary, where that's not always the case in teaching. And so just being cognizant of that and thinking about how assessment companies, given the presumed profit margins that are made there, like how can they be partners in consideration in reducing the cost, if any, to teachers. And lastly, handling the new requirements for educators coming out of Oregon. There's a group discussion prior to which everyone was privy, but a clarifying question around, I might not have captured this, so Shauna's, if you need to restate this and Director Goff re-answer this, around whether teachers with a reciprocal license, if that's automatically renewed after 1 year. So we wanted to correct that notion. You might have to double correct. I might have not even captured that correctly. And also importantly, that for renewals, upon first renewals for teachers, would they need, coming from out of state, would they need to meet these requirements? And that's likely a piece that we won't be able to solve from the council, which perhaps Director Goff can speak to in more detail. And then we got whisked away back to the whole group. So that was from group 1, but please do chime in if I missed anything.
Okay, so group 2, despite my very scientific process of not it, I'm here. So I hope my group members will chime in if I forget anything. So in terms of the first bullet point, we felt, especially from our last working meeting, that generally there weren't any concerns there. I did share some concerns expressed by faculty at least OSU involved in our ESOL and dual language program, similar to the administrator licensing. These are preparing educators to go into K-12, and so it isn't early literacy per se that they are necessarily going to be involved in. And they felt like already in some of the language around that endorsement, it's covered. The other piece, given the fact that they are teaching students from multiple languages, sometimes dual language, not just English, that this English kind of forward perspective around reading might be limiting. So that said, we generally in our group had consensus that this was what we have is good. And in terms of the second, again, generally feeling that what was already listed worked with us, and we didn't have a whole lot of discussion there. In terms of bullet point 3 for evidence, I think there was a sense that multiple measures is the way to go, given the fact that people come to this from very different places, and there are issues around standardized testing. So we wanted to kind of capture that riveting conversation we had at the last meeting, for those who couldn't attend, that really saw, you know, some pros and cons of lots of different ways. So multiple measures might be a good placeholder. And then the last bullet point, we talked about how to handle new requirements for educators. Again, thinking about wanting to make sure that folks coming in who have been trained from out-of-state institutions have the opportunity to learn. And so we had some questions about what that's going to look like in practicality, given if there is a 1-year time frame and people are coming at different places. You know, I guess just putting a bookmark there for TSPC around the availability of additional professional development or training for those folks, depending on where they're coming in, and how that, you know, is going to be rolled out. I think there were some questions, but generally we felt in favor of that, and feeling like a year, if that's the time frame, was reasonable. Anything I missed, group?
Can I ask a clarifying question on the multiple measures discussion you had? Multiple measures is the way to go as an alternative to if they are unable to pass the assessment, or as an alternative to the assessment in general?
I think what I heard is that we wanted as many options available to candidates as possible.
Okay.
To demonstrate competency and knowledge.
I'd also just add a thinking on that if the assessments themselves are free, that would make it easier perhaps to say, you take the standardized assessment and then you can do a multiple measure as well. If they're not free, it creates an extra financial burden on a candidate that we would be concerned about. So just reflecting that.
Thank you. Thank you. So anything else on either group to add or questions before we think about a vote?
Can I ask a dumb question?
Never dumb question.
I mean, it's not a dumb question. It's a novice question because I've never been through the School of Ed process. But as part of the multiple measures, what is the role of the student teaching experience? I had brought that up. Does that get included, you know, as part of the individual's portfolio, or you know, what I'm wondering what role that experience, whether it's in the form of an apprenticeship or, you know, clinical experience, as it were, as Melissa referred to it, how that becomes something that's accessible.
So my sense is that probably each EPP does it a little bit differently, as well as each program within each EPP does it a little bit differently. I know that's something at Oregon State University we're working on, is trying to have a little bit more coherency and consistency across all of our different licensure pathway programs. But I can tell you that we continue to do a lot of assessment during the period of that student teaching or clinical experience. And that they're also taking a class about their internship, we call it, or their practicum, depending on where they are. So they're getting input there. They still have assignments. They're still, really reflecting on their learning a lot. We also have university supervisors who are going out into the classrooms multiple times, upwards of like 16 times in some programs, that they're getting a lot of observation and very direct feedback from those are university employees that are, looking across the standards, looking across the expectations. And then also we're getting that feedback from the cooperating teachers as well. So they are also evaluating the candidates. So all these things are, this is really the culminating experience. This is the capstone. This is the internship, the clinical experience. So it brings it all together into one place.
So, I mean, is this something we should be calling out and encouraging?
We do have standards related to that in the document, but one thing I wanted to kind of bring to light in terms of those internship experiences is, for a while, we are going to have a time period in which we may have university supervisors and classroom teachers that aren't yet where we want them to be. So in order to use that experience as part of that evidence, we'd have to make sure those cooperating teachers are already prepared and those university supervisors are prepared to see that and recognize that in the classroom. So that would be, I think, something that we'd need to really consider until everyone's up to speed, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And that's been a big push for us to actually find those cooperating teachers with those skills. So yeah, it's going to be a real big push.
And I just want to reiterate that how vital that is. During my teacher preparation program, I interned, but taking some classes with some people who did. There were 2 students in my class who basically quit education because they couldn't deal with the kids. They love the lesson plans and they love organizing. And they love the research, but they couldn't get along in the classroom with the kids. So, student teaching and interning and or apprenticeship is really vital to any education program. Thank you.
Totally.
I know that along the same lines, I don't think we have this in the recommendation, but it could be something that goes along with practice, is that in Massachusetts, they've developed a statewide template observation so that when it has with early literacy, and there's certain components that they're expected to show in the lesson, and then that's kind of submitted as a part of the competency.
Helpful.
And I think that's a part of the implementation work that we will need to do. And I appreciate that emphasis on early literacy, because right now, the clinical practice may or may not have a heavy emphasis on early literacy. We're tracking a number of hours that a student's in the classroom. You're looking at a wide variety of skill sets. So if we really wanted to use clinical practice as a method for demonstrating competence, there would need to be real specificity provided around which demonstrated competencies need to be observed within that clinical practice. And so probably beyond the scope of the time of the council to be able to address, but certainly something that we should be discussing and implementing.
Any other thoughts before we transition here? And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Co-Chair Gardner. So really appreciating the rich dialogue it sounds like everyone had within their breakouts, and really appreciating all the input and feedback. And I want to transition us to thinking about our recommendations in terms of a 5-5 vote. You might remember this is a protocol we've been using in the decision-making process. And anytime we see a 3, 4, or 5 in the vote, we know that means consensus. And then anything below that would mean we need more discussion as well. And so we'll get ready, and I'll share my screen in just a minute. We'll get ready to move essentially question by question to vote on these. Alex is going to be supporting me with launching the polls. One other reminder, voting is just for council members. So if you're not a council member, staff at an agency, please do not vote. And I know it looks like we have many council members here today, so we definitely have met quorum. So really appreciate you all being here. So with that, let me share my screen so we're all looking at the same thing together. Okay, and just a quick confirmation, can you all see my screen? Okay, wonderful. So again, fist to 5, we're going to go question by question. So the first one, who must meet literacy requirements in the license and endorsement areas identified by the council? Again, these are the recommendations that you all just saw in breakout rooms, had discussion about. I tracked one very minor adjustment to the grammar in the first bullet point. Want to check any questions, concerns before we go to a vote? I'm not seeing any. Alex, can you launch the poll for, again, just question 1? And Alex, do we have everyone?
We've got 16. Looks like we are waiting for 1 or 2 more folks.
So if you haven't voted, please go ahead and vote if you're a council member. Do a quick check. Any council members that haven't voted yet?
It looks like 1 person is no longer here, and so I think everyone has voted. I'll go ahead and end and share the results.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Okay, it looks like we have votes of 3, 4, and 5, which means consensus. So we have consensus on the recommendations for question number 1. So we'll go ahead and move to the next poll for question number 2. I think close this for a minute so you can all see the actual piece we're voting on. So question 2 is, at which point in their licensure must educators meet the requirements? So a quick check of any additions. I think there might have been one from group 2. So co-chair Gardner, if there's anything you want to add on this in terms of ideas that came up in your group, welcome that. And then open to any other questions before we vote on this one.
Rachel, I do have a question. The question of how we're treating people who complete programs in other states but come to Oregon for their initial licensure. I think we want to include them as well here, right? Beginning in 2027.
And I'm seeing some head nods. Any dissonance in that? And I can't see everyone, so if so, please unmute.
I would just alter it slightly with respect, Senator.
Yeah.
They actually, if they're prepped in another state, they receive their initial licensure in that state and then come to Oregon. But that can be same year, same summer. But we don't grant initial licensure to folks who are educated outside of our state. They have to first get that licensure in the state of their institution. But what we are seeing, just to be really clear, aside from the teacher mobility compact pieces, that putting that completely aside, what we have is a number of virtual programs who serve Oregon residents who are living full-time in Oregon while they're in those virtual schools and completing their program. Those folks are then getting their license in the state, let's say, of Arizona, and then immediately filing for an Oregon license before they've stepped foot in a classroom at all. So I don't know how to frame the language that you're seeking, but I just want there to be clarity that they're not coming to Oregon from having been trained outside and then getting their first license with us.
And they would have a year to complete licensure requirements. Is that the timeline in Oregon?
We don't know that, actually.
Haven't set a time
No,
frame.
but I mean, do they generally have?
Generally, they have to show competency in Oregon. So they may have things that they civil rights exam is a really
Right.
good example. They may have
Right.
they have to demonstrate as a part of that.
And there's no timeline for that currently?
So there is, in order to get that license, they
Yeah.
need to pass that civil rights exam, for example. So we could add the requirement of 2027
Mhm.
to any out-of-state licensed educators.
I mean, if we were just to strike the Oregon in preparation, so candidates completing a preparation program in the spring of 2027, that would open it up to all newly educated educators.
And perhaps during or after the spring of 2027.
Yeah.
Great. Just want to check. Let me move all the faces over here. So with the language additive, essentially replacing the Oregon preparation program, completing a preparation program during or after the spring of 2027. Does that capture the specific pieces, Senator Dembro, you were naming, and then Interim Director Goff that you were naming as well?
Yes.
Wonderful. So let me fully comment so we don't lose that. So we would essentially be voting on question 2 with this change in language as well. So any other questions before we move into launching the polls? Okay, Alex, let's launch the poll. And again, we're just voting on question 2. And we'll take a look to make sure we have all council members voting before we share results. Looks like we're waiting for 2 more, 1 more. Great, Alex, just confirming we've got all votes in?
Yes, I'll go ahead and share.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, for question 2 recommendations, we've got all votes in and all votes are 3 or higher. So again, we've got consensus on question 2, again, with the updated language that we named. So we'll move into question number 3. Move down here. Okay, so question number 3, what evidence does the council recommend that TSPC accept for Oregon EPP pre-service educators seeking licensure in recommended endorsement areas and administrative programs to meet the literacy requirements? And you can see the recommendations here that we'll be voting on. Any questions or additional pieces to track before we shift to launching the poll for question 3?
I just want to clarify that as far as that alternate measures of proficiency, that's intended to be after, and this is if we have free assessment, but that multiple measures is intended for after they have attempted the knowledge assessment. Is that accurate?
Great question.
I feel like how our group was thinking about it is that this is a list of possibilities.
That I don't think is how our group was thinking about it.
No.
And I don't really want to think about it that way. One, I heard and clarify if I'm wrong, interim executive director Goff indicating that having an assessment can increase efficiency on TSPC's side. So to give that wide range of ways that they can demonstrate may hold up the process and make it more difficult for TSPC. And I am very concerned about the consistency of the way those alternate measures might be interpreted, or I can't think of the other word I'm trying to come up with, but I'm just concerned about that being another possibility, for fear that it is a loophole for EPPs to get around what we're hoping for them to follow.
Interim Director Goff, do you want to share anything on this specifically? And then Julie, I see your hand as well.
What I will say is that typically we do have folks do the assessment first. The standardized assessment is typically the first attempt. So that's the process that we currently use. And I would say that that is both certainly for efficiency's sake, but it is also for as we're discussing quality, for us to be able to have a quality review of folks who are applying in an alternate method, because it takes staff time to be able to really do justice to those alternate methods. And so to protect that time for those who truly do need an alternate way of demonstrating their proficiency, it is most effective to get as many through a standardized assessment as possible, and then utilize those alternate assessments for those who truly need a different route.
And then
Dr. Sparsa Brown.
Yeah, I mean, I was in that group where we did discuss the perhaps different, pathways, but I mean, I understand the need for some efficiency and consistency. And even though, like, I really worry about the inherent bias of standardized assessments. So, I mean, I for one think I can live with, particularly if the measure is at no cost to the educators, for them to try that assessment and then offer an alternate path if need be. So.
Are there any specific language changes that we would recommend within this, or do we feel comfortable moving to a vote with it as is?
I would feel more comfortable if it had something that clarified that assessment was the first attempt, that yeah.
Because we don't.
Executive Director Goff, how long have we had multiple measures in place?
I am so sorry, but I am unable to answer that with
Okay.
any degree of confidence.
Okay. I was just curious.
Is there a particular bullet point you were thinking about adding that in, Co-Chair Fritz?
Well, would it be the fourth one?
Perhaps we could, who've mastered the standards but unable to demonstrate through the required assessment, or through their first attempt at the required assessment, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or through an initial assessment.
I think it needs to be really clear that what that assessment is.
Yes. And I just want to, for the record, just say that I am very hesitant about that bullet point, because I do fear that it gives a loophole. And if that bullet point, if we do have alternate measures of proficiency, what do we have, or how can we put in place a quality control measure to make sure that those alternate assessments really are measuring candidate competency? And I don't have the answer to that. I just want to
So I'm going to offer a counterpoint to this, and it's a similar one that I offered at the last meeting, is that if we don't inherently trust that the EPPs are doing what they're supposed to do, what was this entire process for? Because we have put in place very, very specific standards that EPPs will have to demonstrate multiple cycles of data that we have done what we have said we would do. And that is exactly what the program completion report does. Not to mention all the other ways that we collect data for national accreditation and state. So I want to also bookmark that loopholes and trust and all this is something that I'm concerned about too.
Thank you, Co-Chair Gardner. With that in mind, is there anything you'd recommend in terms of language adjustments or comfortable with as is?
Well, what if you were to replace the these with repeating standardized, unable to demonstrate through standardized assessments, then alternate? I mean, that's kind of the issue. Taken out of context, people might say, no assessments. But so.
And
But
I
we
guess
do have assessments. We just are not paying companies to do those necessarily for us.
And the bottom line is we want to make sure we have competent educators who can get outcomes for kids. So I just want to make sure that there's accountability, I guess. Rep Wright?
Well, someone once said, trust but verify. And I totally agree with that. I think we can have all the standards that we want, and all the PPPs can do the best job they know how to do, but we still have to assess whether or not that student has actually learned those things necessary. So I think it's important. I agree with Dr. Fritz that we need that first assessment. If it doesn't work out or they can't handle it, we can always do something else. But I think it's important that assessment be across the board, and then we can see where we can improve in each of the PPPs. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think what we get measured on from TSPC at this point is, are we including those in our courses, but not necessarily are our candidates actually learning it. So I think that's a point well taken, that's an assessment to see if the candidates are getting out of our classes what we think we are providing them.
I would disagree with that, because if we're not assessing individual course expectations, I mean, there are learning outcomes for every single course, and if they're not being assessed, that's a problem on the EPP side, correct? So, but they have to do that in order to go through the process of licensing. So, I mean, I'm not going to hold this up. I guess I would just ask TSPC to really think about the ways to do this. And I am always going to be anti, filling pockets of standardized test makers. I just always will be. I think if there's something that we could create that is equitable and demonstrate something, and I hate to see us teaching to test, because that's one of the things we teach our teachers, right? Is that is not the best way to teach. But that's where we are, and we're also buying into that system, and it's problematic to me. I'm done.
I don't agree when we're talking about skills, knowledge and skills that teachers need.
But we can't test skills on a standardized assessment. Knowledge, perhaps, not skills.
Well, is there a way to word this that would satisfy both of you?
I'm okay with if we can add that language that they first have to do an attempt. That is parallel with what we do with other assessments with TSPC. So if we can add that, I could move forward.
I was fine with it as it was.
I do think it needs to be clear about when the alternate means are going to be available, so we need to add that language after a first attempt.
Appreciating the dialogue on this and want to do a check of with the proposed language of their first assessment if we're feeling comfortable voting at this point. Okay, let's vote and see where we land. So I'll go ahead and hit this as a comment. And then Alex, let's go ahead and launch the poll for question 3. And again, 3, 4, or 5 means consensus.
Can I clarify then? Wait, so we're voting on this knowing that there'll be addition with after the first attempt somewhere in this bullet?
Good question. So I just added a comment in here, replacing these assessments with their first assessment attempt. Does that help?
Oh, okay. I lost the poll.
Oh no. Alex, is there a way to share it again?
Not the same poll, but we can go ahead and launch a new poll if people
Sorry.
would like that. That's
I don't know where it went.
So I will go ahead. I'm going to end this poll, and the next one will be numbered Vista 5 number 4, just so everyone knows and doesn't get confused.
But still voting on number 3.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so you should all have poll 4, but again, voting on question 3. I think we're looking for one more vote. Have any council members not voted?
Looks like we're still waiting for one more.
Thank you, Alex.
It looked like Valerie left. She said be right back in the chat a while ago. Maybe she's not back.
No, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Just checking.
Okay, if you haven't voted in our council member, please go ahead and vote. Okay, looks like we got it. Alex, do you want to share results? Okay, so for this, for question number 3, the recommendations, we do have 2 twos. So this is going to need more discussion before we can move this forward. So I think we'll table this at this point, go ahead and move to question 4. And then we'll note that we need to have more discussion on number 3. Okay. Okay, number 4 is around how would we handle new requirements for educators who are coming to Oregon with out-of-state licenses, including those who come from the state who are part of the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact. And again, we're just voting on these 2 recommendations. Any discussion or questions before we launch the poll on number 4? Not seeing
I,
any.
actually, Rachel, I'm sorry. I do.
That's okay, Senator Dembro.
Yeah. On this second bullet, upon receipt or upon renewal of the Oregon license, um, I guess I'm very comfortable with on the renewal of the Oregon license. But part of the intent of the compact is that people come in with as if they were a currently licensed Oregon teacher. And so, the way that the enabling legislation was written, it was really, I think the intent was that upon their first renewal, they would have to, just like any current Oregon licensee, have to meet the requirements. But they don't need to meet them until their renewal.
Thank you, Senator Dembro. So are you suggesting just taking out the upon receipt portion?
If people are comfortable with that.
Thoughts? And then want to check to Interim Director Goff, any challenges with updating this language?
The
But
only
really, I would throw it out to the group as to which, to be honest, if we're talking about renewal, I'm not sure that we need to do anything. But if we want it to be upon receipt, then that would be something that we would need to argue for, I think, with the compact as its rules are being developed. Do we want to do that? That's the question I would throw to the group.
Any
The
strong?
rules aren't, if the rules aren't drafted yet, I would rather have it be upon receipt. So that they know what they need to do and whether or not that's in their own program, they're taking the module or checking to make sure that their program is offering what they need.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I would concur with upon receipt simply because part of the challenge with part of our challenge in Oregon with the number of educators who are being licensed through virtual programs is that if states through whom those virtual programs operate, right, or from where, I don't know what the right clause is. Obviously, I've lost my brain. Join the compact, it could give them a back door to be operating with large numbers of future Oregon educators at an advantage over Oregon EPP preps.
That makes perfect sense to me. Thank you.
Any other questions before we launch the poll? Okay, let's launch the poll for question number 4. And Alex, if you can send that, great. Thank you. Okay, and I think we've got all votes in, but confirming, Alex?
Yes, I'll go ahead and share now.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so for question 4, we've got all votes of 3 or higher, so we have consensus on number 4. Thank you all. Again, I'm tracking that more discussion needed on number 3, but I think it would be a good time to pause for a break, and then we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes, which would be 2:39. Thank you all.
Welcome back, everyone. So Co-Chair Gardner and Rachel, do we want to discuss that topic before we move on to the next thing? Okay.
I think that would be great. Co-Chair Gardner?
Yeah, I think it makes sense for anyone who voted, was it a 2, that they get a chance to voice those concerns, and then we can talk about what we should maybe do moving forward.
Wonderful. So if you voted 2, again, this is on question number 3. If you can share a little bit more about kind of your reasoning, any concerns that you have, so we can track that as we then think about path forward.
Hi, this is Valerie. One of the things that I was thinking about as the folks were talking is that there were concerns about, about the alternate testing. Now, I take it how do I want to say this? That things have been tried and proven over at Teachers Standards Practice Commission in the coursework and the universities that the teachers have taken part in. And so, while they have taken and passed and done all of the things that they needed to do, there have been cases, especially in Native American teachers, find that there is bias in the testing. And while they went ahead and did the initial test, they chose for alternate testing. And so this was set up by the fellow that he just left this office not but a year ago, from what I understand. And so, if it sounds like we don't trust anybody. So I'm wondering where is this happy medium that we could come to where we are trusting that people are doing their jobs, the students are doing their work. The TSPC has the standards that we all must live by, as far as being credentialed in Oregon. So that is where I'm at, and I'm just a little bit confused of where we seem very reluctant to believe in the systems that we have in place.
Right?
I agree with Val in a large extent. However, we have trusted our system, and look where we are today with our literacy and our elementary and even our outcomes in high schools. So I'm not saying people's intent are wrong. I'm not saying that at all. They want to do what's best for kids. But unfortunately, that has not worked out. I think there's 2 components here. One is the knowledge base, which we're looking at for assessment, and the skill base, which has, this is the way we teach this knowledge. And I think both of them need to be assessed and as continuity throughout the system to make sure that all programs do the best they can, teach the best they can on the standards, because there's going to be some differences just in being able to teach it, because people are different. So I think we need both of those. I think we need the skill set that we can ascertain how the teacher can teach, but we also need the knowledge base that says, this is what I know so that I can teach this skill set. So I think we need both. Thank you.
So I'm assuming the 2 folks who spoke were our 2 twos. Is there any other thoughts? I can talk about the problems with standardized testing. I've taught entire graduate courses on it. I'm not going to go there. And I didn't vote to, but I think, I guess we have to decide what we want to do. I mean, in the past, we have not had entire consensus on things, but we've made sure that those pieces are noted and that all perspectives are noted moving forward at TSPC. We can talk about ways to address the language to make sure that the folks who voted to, if they feel like there was specific language added, we could change and then revote. I'm sure there's alternate ways. Other thoughts, maybe Co-Chair Fritz, about how we should address the twos.
I think as long as we note those things so that when TSPC begins to think about carrying out these, just making sure that our conversations were noted today. I don't know that we need to, if someone had some specific language that they thought would address that, that would be great, but I'm wondering if we should just agree to pass that on with those concerns. Does that work for you, Interim Executive Director Goff? Okay. Does that work for the council? Is everyone feeling comfortable with sending these on with these reservations noted?
I'm still struggling with it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I did vote for that, acknowledging that a test is kind of what we have in line for other licenses, but I do know the problem since I work a lot with diverse students. So I don't know.
Are you okay with the way the language sets, though? I assume so, given that.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just so much caught that I feel like we need to move the process on. I don't like the solution. I don't like adding another test, but I don't see a good alternative.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I've wondered about the possibility of replacing or so that it isn't one more test. Interim Executive Director Goff.
Oh.
I think part of what we all may be struggling with to different degrees is that we have to really hold two truths at one time, which is a standardized assessment is much simpler, faster, and it's got real significant problems with it at the same time. So we need it, and we don't like needing it, and we recognize shortcomings of that. But we need it to set a standard and move things through more quickly. The piece I really want to particularly elevate, however, is Co-Chair Gardner and Rep Wright and Member Switzler's perspective, which is this: there is a difference between the knowledge content and the skill content. And I think that is going to be TSPC's conversation with our vendors around this assessment needs to be measuring the content knowledge that exists within these standards. And then TSPC needs to be in conversation with our education prep providers around how does the clinical practice then verify the skill standards that are reflected within this group of standards. And I think perhaps we can do that very well. And by fleshing that out with greater clarity, it might provide more comfort to all of us with the challenge that we're discussing. And as an educator, and an English teacher, I am so happy to hear the reservations that people have and the drive that people have both. I think both of those things are very, very important for us to have. So I'll definitely pull that forward as we continue this work.
But wasn't that something we discussed before? Could these be embedded in an existing test? So it's to cut down all of the more testing.
I feel like that was brought up previously, yeah, maybe at our last meeting, but again, just a note, I don't even know if such things exist.
I know. But if we're creating, yeah, I don't know.
I wonder, kind of pulling some of the different threads here together. I think we have the pathway the co-chairs named of we can note all the specific input, pass this along to TSPC. An alternative could be looking at the language and seeing if there's a way to specifically name, I think, Interim Director Goff, what you were naming of kind of exploring kind of what might be possible for both for skills and knowledge too. So I think that could be an alternative. So really looking to the council on kind of which direction would you like to go in terms of number 3 in particular.
I don't know if there's a way that there's a summative, because it does feel like we're all contributing to a system that is a struggle, especially as I start getting in my state test scores. And it's like there's stories behind that, but that you could also have somebody who knows all of the knowledge but cannot deliver it effectively in the classroom. And so it needs to be a compilation of, yes, I have this knowledge, but that's only part of the score that I would receive for my competency. And the other part has to be an assessment of what the teacher has done with students measured by outcomes.
And that seems like that would go along with that practicum experience that we've put in the standards, is it having that measure of the skills be there. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So are we generally hearing that we want to just ensure that these points are noted? And are we comfortable moving forward with these items highlighted? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Important discussion.
Okay, I think if we are okay with that, then Rachel, we're okay to move on. All right, great. So we now want to talk about the report that will be delivered to the governor's office. All of these components that we've talked about have been packaged into a Literacy Council report. And you did receive that before today, so hopefully you had a chance to look through that. And I'm going to let Rachel take over from here, and we'll talk about next steps with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Co-Chair Fritz. And sharing my screen again, so making sure you all can see that. I think so. So I'm going to briefly walk us through the report again, as Co-Chair Fritz mentioned. Hopefully you all got a chance to at least take a skim of this. But I want to draw your attention to some specific changes between when you last saw this report to now. So I'll go through again pretty briefly, but want to name at the top, we've done some copy editing and then really added some more in-depth information to the executive summary. So you'll see some changes here. So executive summary goes through page 5. And then for each of the parts of the recommendations, I'll use this as an example. You'll now see some information that is around the background. So again, really adding this in to summarize some of the key issues, tensions, things that you've grappled with as a council as you've been thinking about the different recommendations before actually adopting those. And so again, this is for part 1, but you'll also see this as I scroll down to page 17. Sorry for can sometimes be a little jolting to go that fast, but again, you'll see the background for part 2, and then we'll put this in also for part 3 around the licensure recommendations. Speaking of the licensure recommendations, on page 21, you'll also see a placeholder that we have, and really we'll be using our discussion this council meeting today to inform this. So this will get added to as well. And we'll add the recommendations that have been adopted and also note, again, for question 3, where we've got some additional considerations for TSPC. And then finally, the last changes in Appendix B. And you'll see this used to be a table, but we've listed out members, and we really tried to be cognizant of adding in all the expertise in the room and what you each have brought to the council as well. So again, you'll see that updated on Appendix B. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And again, welcome you to take a deeper dive into the report, but want to just check if there's any questions, input, things that we should consider before we look to a vote around the report. Not seeing any immediate questions or input. And I also know some of you might be skimming through the report, always balancing the right amount of wait time. Okay, I guess a quick check before we actually turn to a poll. Just a general kind of like head nod. Are we feeling comfortable to vote on the report, knowing again we're going to be adding in based on today's meeting and discussion to part 3 in particular? So you might see a few changes between today and when we anticipate releasing this this week. Okay, seeing some head nods. All right, Alex, how are we doing with the poll? Are we ready to launch one around the report? I will also name the recommendations we pulled in are the recommendations you all have already voted on as well. So it's really voting on executive summary, background information being added, and shift to Appendix B. And thank you as you're already voting. I think we're waiting on 2 more. Alex, is it looking like we still need 2 more as well on your end?
I believe just one. Oh, it looks like one more just voted. We are all good now.
All good. Okay. Do you want to share the results? Okay. It looks like we have 1, 2. So curious if anybody wants to speak to that, any concerns that we need to note around the report.
I hate being a 2. That the only piece that I see as not showing up in the report that has shown up as a thread throughout the meetings has been this need for funding in a sufficient way in order for all of this work to actually occur. I get concerned about the plan being proposed at representing what the council has repeatedly said in that area.
Thank you, Interim Director Goff. Is there a particular place you would imagine that being included?
I would imagine it be included in the executive summary. All that follows, it has dependencies upon capacity of agencies, educator preparation programs, districts, ESDs, and that capacity is built upon sufficient funding to do the work listed below. Some reference to that.
Rep Wright.
Well, thank you. I totally agree, Melissa. Unless this is funded, it's not going to happen, and probably shouldn't happen if we don't care enough about this process that we don't fund it. Then it's really probably not very important to any other people. So I think possibly within it, it should say something somewhere about This is all intent. The intent of this bill is on the funding to provide the necessarily materials and support to make this successful. And as Senator Dembro mentioned, you know, the earlier we can see as representatives and senators what this could cost us, and the sooner we can put a package together in support of this. So the sooner the better we get some information, and it needs to be fully funded or it's just not going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that. Senator Dembro?
Yeah, Rip Wright stole my words, but I do think we need an analysis as soon as we can about, you know, what kind of numbers we're talking about. I mean, numbers of individuals that are going to need this kind of professional development, and then what it might cost, and then, you know, some scenarios of how that could be funded. And, you know, since we have the governor coming in a few minutes to talk to us, you know, I'm happy to raise that subject with her. Because, you know, I do think that the sooner that we can get some scenario planning, the better.
Appreciate you adding that. So hearing the initial nod to include some information just about the funding that has come up in discussions for the council, and kind of the future work too, that might not be the work of this council in particular, of like coming up with those scenarios and specific numbers, but having that as part of the conversation to inform next steps. That is helpful. Anything else, just as I'm tracking notes on the particular report? Okay. And then Co-Chair Gardner, Co-Chair Fritz, anything you would add in terms of the report, and or if you would recommend we kind of break out the votes on the individual sections, or do another vote, or again, just name this as feedback and not have specific consensus on the report?
I'm kind of wondering if we can't make a note that we will ensure there is something regarding funding in the executive summary, and then vote again so we have consensus. Does that sound reasonable, Co-Chair Gardner?
I think that makes sense. Okay. And we get to do one more of these. Like, doesn't everybody want to do that?
The polls are very fun. So, okay, so noting the request to put in at least something in the executive summary around funding is what I'm hearing. So with that addition, Alex, would you be good to launch another poll for us? Great. Okay. So again, council members, please vote. And again, 3 or above is consensus.
And thank you for calling that out, Interim Executive Director Goff. I didn't even put that together, but that was a good catch.
I think we are waiting on
Can I get something clarified?
Yes.
So what our FIS to 5 is on is whether or not to add the financial portion.
Great clarification. So it would be adding in the funding into the report. So we're still voting on the report with funding included in it in terms of the executive summary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then Alex, do we have everyone, or waiting for one more?
Yep, we've got everyone now.
Great. All right, you want to share results?
I believe they are sharing. If they're not, let me know.
They look like they are. Great. All right, so we have votes of 3 and above for the report with the addition of funding in the executive summary. So thank you all, really appreciating that, and another opportunity to be able to vote in our decision-making protocol. With that, I think Co-Chair Gardner, I'm turning it over to you with also the acknowledgement. We'll likely start a conversation and pause it in the midst of it.
Yes, so I know we're welcoming the governor in about 10 minutes. So why don't we, in the meantime though, take a chance or take the moment to give everyone the opportunity to share maybe 1 or 2 minutes maximum of your thoughts, your experiences, just kind of your general impressions as we are wrapping up the amazing work that this council has done. You know, so maybe thinking about what feels different about the work, maybe thinking about recommendations for how we define or measure success from all of this work in the next 1 to 5 years. And then also maybe thinking about key opportunities to not lose sight of as we move to implementing recommendations. So feel free to jump in with your reflections, and I'll try and keep an eye on time. And I know when the governor gets here, we'll give the hook anyway. So. Right.
Well, first off, this has been an amazing process. And I got to work and meet with people I probably would not have been able to do so before. So thank all of you for your input and for working together. And it's amazing to me sometimes how a bunch of individual educators can come to consensus, because sometimes that's pretty difficult in my experience. So well done, everybody. And in the end, this is simply all about how much we love kids. I mean, you know, we do whatever's in the best interest of our children. And that's what it comes down to in whatever we do, whether it's standards, whether it's funding, any of those kinds of things. It's what we do for kids, what we do for our futures. And we cannot afford to nitpick. We cannot afford not to fund the things that are going to be beneficial for our kids and our future. So I'll shut up and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Wright. Anyone else like to share?
Sure. I would first like to start by thanking everybody that has organized this amazing work. All of you in the governor's office, and our wonderful co-chairs. So it has been a tremendous amount of work, and I want to acknowledge that and express my gratitude. Meeting everybody and hearing, having just the diversity of voices has been great. It's been a painful process in some ways, but I think it's been a really good process. So I understand. I appreciate, again, the way the process is rolled out. I don't know how to keep this going and maybe do some check-ins as things are implemented. I mean, I would love to still have a chance to come back and kind of do check-ins if that's possible as this rolls out. So that's just a request. I don't know how that can happen or if we want that to happen, but I would love it.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Others?
I'll go. Just same thing, Julie. Thank you for everybody who's helped to organize. And my message is just going to be one of hope. And I think my lens on this has been just sort of the practical application of what I see in classrooms every day. And I think about the 2 grade levels right now. I'm thinking about the most. One are my current 3rd graders who I didn't quite see the outcomes on the OSAS that we hoped. But I also have to remember they started kindergarten in Zoom and then had 1st grade still in masks, where they weren't always able to see, you know, how different words are formed. And so, but then I look to my 2nd graders right now, and they've had 2 years where I really feel like at our school, we shifted our practices and have done a lot of learning as we go. And what they can read and do is far and above what we've ever had entering 3rd graders able to do. So I feel really hopeful about what they can do. And sometimes I measure it by, I get the best letters of apology with very good spelling. Like they really understand word patterns and variant vowels, and they're empowered by it, and they still love reading. So I just think our message is where we sometimes might see the results, we have to kind of think about where to look for those, because I do feel like our teachers are incredible in Oregon and they have shifted and done so much. And so I'm just feeling hopeful, and I am excited to hire teachers who've gone through these standards and have them join our classrooms. So thank you all. I've enjoyed really being part of this process.
Senator Weber.
Thank you. My dog has left the building, so we don't have to worry about a bark fest. which I apologize for happening at the beginning. I really appreciate all the hard work that's been done on this, but I really think that this has to be an ongoing movement. We have got to continually look at, our test scores, look at the application letters for scholarships that I was so disappointed in the last few years. We've got to look at all those things and continue to analyze what it is we need to do better. But in the meantime, I really appreciate all of the work that has been done to make this possible. So it's going to be interesting to see it going forward and how it's going to impact our schools and our learning. So thank you.
Senator Denbrough.
Yeah, thank you. I too really appreciate both that this group was formed, that the governor called this group into creation, and the way it's evolved. I remember when we were debating over the House bill that created the literacy, people saying, well, there's no way the EPPs are going to go along with this, right? That's what we were hearing in the building. And having this group be co-chaired by, two very skilled professionals from the EPPs, I think has really helped to make a difference. And is giving this work, I think, a lot of credibility, but also a launch pad for what I hope will be future work. I would love to see tight relationships, tighter. I mean, there are certainly relationships, but even tighter relationships between the EPPs and the school districts when we're looking at the necessary professional development that's going to come out of this. I think that these standards are giving potentially a real value added to Oregon's EPPs. If I'm a young person and I want to become a licensed teacher here in Oregon, I'm going to want to go to an Oregon EPP because I'll know that I'm going to get the instruction that, I don't have to go back and get trained down the road on this. And I think that's something that will really be good for Oregon education. So thanks for letting me be part of this.
Shauna's.
I too I want to thank all of the people who put in so much work behind the scenes. I never experienced getting to just show up at meetings and do the work and then the endless hours of nitty-gritty getting everything ready behind the scenes for the next session just magically happens. I know it's not magic, so thank you so much to all of the people who do all the behind the scenes work in between and for all the great facilitation in the meetings. I really have valued so much the collaboration and the perspectives of this group. I would say that leading this work in at a school building level has felt really isolating for a lot of years. And it's been amazing to make all of these connections with so many of you and to see all of the pockets of deep knowledge and expertise that are in all the corners of our state. We know that the science isn't new, and I think something that's been really sad is that science has been ignored or swept aside because it was sometimes linked with whatever government administration happened to be in office and places. And so something that feels new is just unified collaboration around what is best instruction for students. And that feels really refreshing. Also having state grant money to do some of this groundwork while we're also getting ready for what's going to be a huge lift across the state is feels really different and powerful. And in terms of key opportunities going into the future, I think there are a lot. I think it's going to take all hands on deck. And I too am excited about maybe fantasizing about more partnerships between school building levels and our universities, the EPPs, the ESDs. So very, very excited. I have a lot of hope.
Valerie.
I just want to say that I really appreciate all of you and, going through some of these things, when having the opportunity to speak, not representing all Native Americans, there's so many of us, but to actually have a perspective put in and make folks aware of what some of the things that have been happening in Native nations, and to be able to have input on that has been so very important to me. And when I share out with the other tribal nations, it just makes my heart feel really good that we're a part of the conversation and we're at the table. Thank you.
So we'll pause there and hand over to Rachel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Co-Chair Gardner. Really appreciating hear all of your reflections, and I know we'll have time for more reflections as well. But at this point, I do want to welcome Governor Tina Kotek for joining us. And Governor, we have had such a rich conversation today thus far, and really glad that you're joining us at this point as we're in the midst of reflection. We have landed the last deliverable of the council, which is adopting the licensure recommendations, with one place for TSPC to continue to take in feedback and make considerations based on that feedback as well. We also had consensus on the Literacy Council report, with the addition of one other piece to the executive summary. So again, just a really robust conversation today. And then, as I mentioned, we've started hearing reflections from each of the council members, with more to go. But at this point, I just want to turn it over to our wonderful co-chairs, Co-Chair Gardner and Co-Chair Fritsch, to offer a few words.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. So I think as people were beginning to reflect, and I think this was true of the bulk of the conversations we've had that have been very, very rich. I was just taking notes of what people were saying, and the love of kids that drove this work, and wanting the best for Oregon's children, as well as children other places coming to us from to Oregon. The diversity of voices that were represented on this council were really helpful, and not always made for immediate consensus, but I think what we were able to do was to listen to each other really fully, and use the information and the expertise that everyone came from their own perspectives to really inform the work we did. And I think the other piece that was reflected in the initial thoughts was just hope of moving forward, and what this work really can entail for both our EPPs, our educator preparation programs, our K-12 partners, our communities, teachers, and then obviously the kids. So with that, I'll turn it over to Co-Chair Fritz.
Thank you. And I will just echo what so many have said about the connections that have been made in this group, and the vast knowledge that exists in this group is just, it was just amazing to work with such a great panel of people who, as Co-Chair Gardner said, really had kids' interests at heart. We all wanted what was best for kids, and we moved toward that in a succinct way. Although, as Co-Chair Gardner said, we had our bumps, but we're able to work through that and honor and respect each other's opinions and expertise. And with that, I also want to say, I think hope can be a really great through line for all of us. Hope for kids, but I also have hope that empowering teachers with the knowledge and skills to be successful with their students, I think might have some impacts that, including kid outcomes, teacher retention. When teachers feel like they're successful and can do the job well, I feel like we will hang on to those teachers in a better way. And I see my teacher friends in here nodding their heads, because for me, I was trained not within this same way and didn't feel that kind of success and empowerment until I learned these things that we included in these standards. And I think it is just an exciting time for education, exciting time for Oregon, and Oregon's kids and teachers. So thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been great.
Thank you, co-chairs. Really appreciate all that you have offered today, and then also just chairing this council as well over the past year. And with that, Governor, I'd love to turn it over to you if you have any reflections that you'd like to offer to the council.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you to both the co-chairs. I'm just glad to have some time with you today, and I'm going to cheat on my schedule and probably say I want to hear a lot of these reflections. So I'm going to be brief. I think last time I was here in September, I feel a little shy about, hey, I'm here at the beginning and popping at the end, but I just want you to know that I've been getting regular updates, been very happy with the progress, very excited about where you've ended the work. It's a significant step forward. And the fact that you're all keeping the needs of children front and center. We adults can get in the way sometimes, but if we really focus on improving and strengthening literacy instruction in the state, which is what you were charged to do, you've really done that. And we're in a much better place. We have a pathway to improvement and strengthening what we need to be doing in the state because of your hard work. So I want to say thank you for all of you for doing that. You've had great leadership with your co-chairs, so thank you. We've had wonderful agency involvement. So I want to thank all the agency folks who've been working hard on this. And really just everybody's engagement. We never start off everybody in the same place because that would just be super dull. But we all know what we're trying to get to, right? Which is making sure we're doing the best that we can be doing every day, and how we're instructing new educators, helping current educators continue to hone their skills, plus also make sure we have the outcomes for our students. What's great about the progress you're making is that you're building on things that are out there now and trying to build on existing guidelines. Alignment's important. We don't need to recreate the wheel. Lining up with the dyslexia standards, for example, I think is a great approach. So thank you for trying to think about it that way. I think that's important. I know we have legislators who've been heavily involved. This is a, more than one branch, both public and private sector and bipartisan efforts. So I'm just really glad that our legislators have been involved in this because, they need to carry the ball forward as we go into whatever we might need on the legislative end. And as Rachel noted, TSBC will be, grabbing the football, going to the next on the prep programs. And I'm really optimistic because of the hard work you've put into it that we're going to have the progress we need to see. So thank you. And a special shout out to Alex Hebler for all the great work that they have been doing for just keeping everybody logistically on task. So appreciate everyone. And I just want to sit back and listen. So this is a joy for me to hear your reflections. So I'm going to stop there. So thanks, Rachel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Governor. And appreciate you'll be able to join us for a little bit, and whenever you need to jump off, we just appreciate the time that you've been able to share with us. I think Co-Chair Gardner, I know you were in the midst of launching our reflection, so I'll hand it back to you, and then Rep. Wright, I also see your hand as well.
So I think Julie was next, Julie Reagan, Melissa, and then Rep. Wright.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that, again, like so many of you have said, the organization and the facilitation of the meetings has been really great. And I never felt like my time was wasted. I felt like we were really pretty tasky all the time. I'm a tasky person, so I like that. And then when I wrote down some notes about how I felt the process went, I feel like hope-filled. Because I feel like we are looking at this with like some possible solutions for teachers and students rather than just like giving teachers a test to administer to kids and like check in and see how things are going. So, you know, we're offering teacher solutions. Opportunities to not lose sight of. I feel like teachers are hungry to learn about literacy right now. And I feel like elementary educators are excited. And so there's some momentum. And I think, you know, if we can just keep that ball rolling, and instead of putting more on the plates of educators, you know, figuring out a way to support them through this change is going to be key. And I would just like to keep on the forefront of this all that leaders and administrators need to be on board, because they're going to help drive the change. And if teachers don't respect those leaders, and those leaders don't have that knowledge, the change is going to be really hard to make. So those are just things that I would encourage to keep in the forefront.
Interim Executive Director Goff.
Thank you. I'm going to try and make that title longer. I just want to say thank you to the co-chairs in particular. I think you facilitated us very well, and I have modeled how to have difficult conversations about a subject that we all feel so passionately about. And I think that is an art that has been lost in many spaces that we unfortunately operate in today. So I appreciate that very much. I also feel as a language arts teacher that in middle and high school, this has been really sorely needed in this state for a very long time. And giving our youngest children the opportunity to know what the people who are shoulder to shoulder with them know, and not feel dumb in 4th, 5th, 6th grade because the books that they are able to read off the shelves aren't the books that they're actually interested in or that their friends are talking about. So it's a tremendous gift. And then I really loved, was it Shanaz who was, or Julie, who was just saying pull forward, the things to pull forward. I don't want us to forget that the professional development needs of teachers and the time that they have is insufficient to actually teach existing licensed staff these standards. So I am carrying that forward in my mind in my conversations with my colleagues at the Department of Education. And we certainly have a great opportunity around implementation with our educator prep programs. And we have more teachers in the system, of course, than are entering in the system. And so the approaches that we take are going to be very important. And I guess I just close with, I would say the agency leadership, having come from the governor's office and now being in this role and seeing how the agency leaders are working together to really build an integrated matrix of responsibilities, clarity around who's responsible for which pieces as a part of this work, and to see how we can leverage each other's skill sets and expertise and resources in order to make this happen well for our educators to influence our classrooms. I'm really excited about that, and it gives me great hope for what will happen in our schools. So thanks.
Rep Wright.
Well, thank you, Governor, for my appointment. It's been a wonderful experience. I think this is a major first step into education improvement. I don't think it's reform. We're going to improve because there's some good things about public education already happening. So thank you for that. Hats off to Pooja. She's not here today. I know she had some things to do. So she and I had many conversations, and I appreciate her opinions and the way we had some discussions. I would also like to offer my support and help with you in what we're going to do for funding for this. Because if we don't fully fund this process, it's not going to happen, and will all be a waste of time. So I'd be happy to work with you and to make sure we can fully fund this process and we do what's best in the interest of our children. Thank you.
Other reflections to share? Senator Denbrough.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on Rep Wright's comment. I said I would. The funding piece is going to be really important, Governor. You know that, and it's going to be really important that the legislature have a clear proposal for I mean, what will it cost to roll this out so that all the incumbent teachers are able to to get what they need through the professional development. And ideally, I don't know if this will be part of your recommended budget, if it will be through a budget bill, but somehow, well before the start of this session, to have a clear sense of a long-term plan as teachers are coming up for renewal. They're going to have to meet these standards, so they're going to have access to professional development before that. We want to be providing it for them and helping districts out. All of that at a time that we know the districts are seeking more funding in general to meet their needs, still coping with so many effects of the pandemic, et cetera. So how the need for this funding is balanced against those other funding needs, that will be a challenge, but I'm sure you'll solve it well before it comes to the legislature. I do want to also say, as I said before you got here, what has really impressed me in this process has been the co-leadership of our two professors from our EPPs. And, I do see this process as one that, can really bring our EPPs and school districts closer together and to get young people excited about becoming teachers and going through our EPPs. Too many of our Oregon kids are choosing to get educated elsewhere. But there's so much value added in having them go through a robust Oregon EPP institution, and we need to really build on that. So long term.
Dr. Sparsa Brown.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and for appointing me to be on this council. It's been really a wonderful opportunity. A couple of comments following up on the funding issue. I was just reflecting on a colleague of mine that is going on sabbatical next year, and she teaches many of our reading courses. And understands that she wants some retraining on the science of reading. So she had applied for an internal grant to be able to take a program to do some retraining, which she did not get. So will there be, hopefully, we'll be thinking about funding that may be needed by educators ourselves, professors that might need more education on the science of reading, because, we're going to be charged with teaching this prospective teachers, right? So we can't forget that there's going to be funding needed for that aspect. The other piece that I wrote in chat is there's also, we have dual language programs in the state and many, bilingual students that are working across languages and needing to also shine a light on standards needed for those students. And there's a big controversy really in professions across the country regarding the science of reading for English learners and such. And I don't want us to fall into the politics, but I am very hopeful because this group was so great at how we've come to alignment and consensus with these standards. So I know that we can do it here in Oregon and offer something that's not going to just keep adding to the controversy that exists right now with English learners and the science of reading. So again, it's been a great process. We've had tremendous leadership, and I'll repeat the word hope. Certainly there's so much hope now going forward here, and there's going to be joy in learning, joy by our students. So thanks again.
Hannah.
I just wanted to offer a case in point to something that Julie Reagan said a few minutes ago. She said that educators are hungry. I think we hear a lot about teachers are burned out and teachers are not going to do anything above and beyond. Teachers are burned out. And yet, so both in Julie's district and my district, both districts are using state early literacy grant money, a significant portion of that toward teacher training. We've talked a lot in this group, especially early on when we were guiding our early phases of wanting to make sure that we were not being prescriptive in lieu of really equipping teachers with the skills themselves. So I, with my district administrator, thought I was going to have a summer cohort I am going to have a summer cohort in preparation for cohorts to facilitate cohorts over the next 2 school years, using the online asynchronous course developed by Rhonda and her team. I told my district administrator, it should be great if I could have 3 to 5 people in a summer cohort, summer pilot, so I could guinea pig this on a few people before leading it next year. We have 47 teachers choosing to do this work this summer during their break from school. 47. My district admin came to me and said, "What do we do?" She said, "I have never, ever, ever in all my years, either as a teacher or an administrator, seen this kind of excitement or momentum." She said, "I feel like we just need to tell them yes, all of them." And I said, "Yeah, we need to tell all of them yes. We'll just figure it out as we go." But that's kind of, teachers are hungry. And when there's opportunity for the right kind of thing and it's funded, I think it will just have such huge impact on so many people and so many lives.
Governor Kotek. Oh, you're muted.
I definitely hear you on the need for resources for continued professional learning. Absolutely. We're trying to figure that out for my budget at the end of the year. And then, and it's exciting to hear the momentum and thrill out there among the educators about the literacy grants. And so we're not going back. We're a culture of yes now when it comes to literacy across the board. So, so I just want you to know, I hear you on that, and we're working on trying to figure that out for the budget.
Sarah Spencer.
Just wanted to extend another round of thank you because it has been an incredibly well-planned and facilitated process, and deep appreciation for the time ahead of time to review materials in order to be prepared. And I encourage all of us to think future forward because we all know it's not a one and done. We're going to revisit this frequently, and what that support looks like for our students and our educators is going to be critically important, because that we can get anything done in this state when we collaborate. We've seen that over and over and over again. And so how do we create a community that exists across our state for our teachers as they embark on this? Not just our new incoming, but those folks who are in the work and are going to need just as much support and a collaborative spirit. So I am looking forward to and willing to help to support planning that move. And I lucked into this spot, so I appreciate it being here, Governor Kotek, in my interim role. I lucked into this, and it is a passion of mine. So I will do anything I can to help support our educators to make the best way possible for our students, particularly where we can't write the future. Technology and AI are moving so quickly that I can't even fathom what 5 years from now students will be looking at in terms of what's in front of them. And so I think it's going to require us all to stay very attentive to the learning process for everybody. And thank you again.
I'm going to turn it back to Rachel.
Great. Thank you so much, Co-Chair Gardner. And again, just to appreciate all of you sharing reflections and kind of what you're spotting, both through your experience on the council, but also forward looking as well. So deep, deep appreciation. And from the high level reflections back to a few technical pieces as well. So I am going to, before we get to some next steps, I know you all have really enjoyed the voting process. We're going to vote one more time just to make sure we have crossed all of our T's and have clear path forward, particularly on where we had a really robust conversation around recommendation 3. So I am going to pull up my screen just so we are super clear. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can I get a quick head nod if you can see my screen okay? Okay, all right, so we are going back to recommendation 3, and this is where we had a lot of conversation around some additional inputs that we want to share with TSPC. And again, this is a place we want to be super clear in what we are doing and have one final poll decision making with the FISTA 5 protocol. So what we are voting on is essentially moving these recommendations forward with all of the input we've already captured from those who voted 2 initially on the recommendations, as well as from the full conversation about question number 3 as well. So with that, Alex, are you able to launch the poll? All right, so again, only council members need to vote, and anything that's 3 and above means consensus that we are moving these forward with all of the feedback that we took in around concerns with recommendation 3. Looks great. It looks like we've got everybody in, Alex.
Yes, we do. I'll go ahead and share them now.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so we've got our results shared and we have 3 and above. So we have consensus on that path forward. And again, appreciate you all jumping in to do one last poll for today and for the council. I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll shift into a few next steps. Okay. So again, we just appreciate the conversation today and know there's ongoing interest, really thinking about all of the recommendations and then what that means for high quality implementation as well, once those are adopted. So just again, deep appreciation for the ongoing interest. And I think Interim Director Goff, you might have a few pieces you want to briefly share about some next steps on the TSPC front.
Sure. Thank you so much. We definitely have energy to come to a close, so I'm going to be very respectful of people's time and interest. But as we talk about next steps, we have a few things that are happening with TSPC. One is tomorrow, Co-Chair Fritz and Rachel are going to be presenting the standards for first reading. So it's a really exciting conversation that they will be having with the commission. I will be participating in that. Our commission meeting retreat is today and tomorrow. So I'll as well. And we already have some insights on some of the questions that they may have around the standards. Some are just more like rules advisory committee work that will be done between now and when the commission adopts the standards. Others are more about background thinking, like what were you considering as you made a decision to go this route rather than that route? What are those they want to learn more about what were those conversations behind the scenes that led to this, the standards being presented as they are. So those questions, which will be interesting, I think, to kind of go back, Co-Chair Fritz, and think about, and I'll help you with this as well, of course, but just thinking about some of those conversations that we have had and how we got to this final product, which is pretty exciting. And then they also have questions, of course, related to implementation, and that's really their work moving forward into the future. But so that first step is tomorrow. They will meet again in July. And it's at that time that we anticipate they'll adopt the standards. And then the rule will go into effect on August 1st. And we really wanted to get that across the line in time for our education preparation partners to be able to do their planning to begin their capacity building. So I'm sharing with you the screen. related to our implementation planning that we've been doing across agency. This was started by an internal TSPC team and really brought in by through the leadership of HEC with Executive Director Cannon. And we are looking at what will happen over these next 3 years to get our learners across the line for that June 2027 standardized assessment and possibly alternate measure that will demonstrate their knowledge that we talked about today. So this year, 24-25, is a time period where we as agencies at the government level will continue to be working with each other to, as I was referencing earlier, clarify our roles and make sure that we all know who's on which base and who's catching the ball and who's pitching, so that we're supporting our EPPs extremely well as they are going through this culture change process on some campuses and acceleration on others, but also our school districts and ESDs who have a lot of questions and will continue to do so. We then have identified work that TSPC will specifically lead, and we'll have a project lead for all of this calendar year, working with our ed prep programs, setting timelines and expectations so that our EPPs understand the standards well and understand how they are going to be reporting to TSPC around the alignment of their current offerings and what they will need to be doing in the future. We also have outlined expectations for EPPs and for the teacher candidates as well, so that they are really, really clearly understand, oh, okay, so what I'm going to be responsible for in 3 years will be different than what others are responsible for. And so right now, these candidates largely are not going to have started their education programs. So it's something to be thinking about, that our EPPs are really getting out ahead. And then when you see these green and purple boxes on this page, you can see this is work reflective of that collaboration across agencies as well. So not just considering who is receiving their license for the first time, and we'll be working with elementary learners, but also how then do we map what will happen with existing licensed educators in the state and for out-of-state educators to ensure that they get that professional development and support that the educator prep programs largely will not be providing. Not that they won't be a partner, but largely they won't be the sole provider of this content knowledge. And so we have tried to map that out so that by year 2 in the 25-26 academic year, there is real clarity around the action plans that each of the universities will be working on, and how support teams will work with them in order to help them get the key learning that they need and have the support that they need. And this will include things not just working with the faculty who will be teaching the courses, but really thinking about accreditation and who's doing the data collection and what data are we looking at. And those are exciting conversations that expand beyond the standards themselves. And sometimes people just don't think about that work. And then we mapped out again. So aside from the system, then who is responsible for which pieces? And then going on to is our money year. That's the year that our educator prep programs are going to be submitting evidence to TSPC related to, hey, we've got all our programs are now in alignment. The draft of this, their program plans, their evidence will be required in December of 26, with a final. I think where we're thinking we will be setting that final will be for March or April of that year, to make sure that there is time for feedback and going back and forth with our EPPs as they're going through this process and implementing the new standards. But by this time period, the EPPs are teaching to the standards, and they're really working on a lot of the documentation that's associated with the collection of evidence to demonstrate that they are now in alignment. I want to note that the language arts adoption process for the state of Oregon for K-12 begins in 2027, with the adoption cycle beginning in 2028. And our colleagues at the Department of Education have an eye on that for how do we leverage this title shift with folks coming out of our EPPs to also then inform how we can better support that language arts adoption, perhaps being broader than our current adoption rate, which I think I think is at about 70% of our language arts of our districts use our state recommended texts for literacy. And so Director Williams and her team have done a really good job of thinking about how can we leverage work happening over here at our EPPs to also support the work that's happening over here. And we're really trying to make sure that that happens. So the 3 years have been loosely mapped, a lot more fill in the blank to do for EPPs. One of the things, Governor, I want to make sure that you're aware of is our EPPs are very much in different spaces in this work. And even just, I think the example that Dr. Esparza Brown gave related to her colleague who applied for that grant and didn't receive it. When you lose one colleague who for a year to go on sabbatical, you lose the opportunity to also have that colleague involved in all of this implementation plan, but that is the crux of the work. And these departments are not huge departments. These are, they're relatively small. So when you have that type of change, it can certainly impact what can happen at an individual institution level. And so our job at TSPC is to be in close contact and communication with our educator prep partners, and finding out what are those unique circumstances that you are facing and how do we then help you meet the deadlines that have been established in order to make sure that our students are all prepared by that spring of 27.
Well, thank you, Interim Director Goff. Really appreciate the preview of what you and agency leaders have been thinking about for the next 3 years, and know there's a lot to come as well. And so I think what we've heard from the council is really being able to think about the feedback loop of what questions are emerging, but also how the dots are getting connected between the recommendations you all have worked on, both today, but also over the past year. And so we're going to be continuing to be in conversation with TSPC to really think about how do we help with that feedback loop as well, and continue to work in partnership as well. And then I think named a few times on this call, but also being really clear on what resources, supports that you all have identified as well, how that comes into the picture, particularly as part of the budget development process as well. And I know that was a lot of information towards the end of the meeting, so appreciating that. Want to check for any questions or additional inputs, and appreciating all that's coming into the chat as well before I turn it back over to the co-chairs.
All right, well, thank you all. So I think this is where Co-Chair Fritz and I get to express our appreciation and wrap up what has been just a really enriching and wonderful experience. So I think from my personal perspective, I just want to thank, first of all, Co-Chair Fritz, who's been a wonderful partner in all of this, and coming from different perspectives, but more often than not, we are able to come together and really, I don't know, I've learned a lot. So it's been helpful for me to get to the opportunity and privilege to work with Co-Chair Fritz. Thank you each, same. I have learned a lot from you and really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to hear the many different sets of expertise and background that people brought. And I really want to just give a tremendous thank you. Someone mentioned before the magic that goes on before these meetings. That is really the work of folks like Pooja and Alex and our TSPC colleagues, our HEC colleagues, our EAC colleagues. I mean, ODE folks are working so hard behind the scenes, and that's not us, that's them. So they come and do so much to really think through every single detail and help us do the best we can and move this work forward. So just a tremendous sense of appreciation for all these groups that I know always have a lot on their plates, always under-resourced, always needing more because they do so much that's pivotal and important to the state in all corners of education. So thank you so much.
Yes, the whole time everyone was talking about that, I was having the same thoughts, Susan, that it is the team behind us that really was able to move this work forward in an organized fashion. So I have so much gratitude for the amazing team that Pooja and all of the others who were doing that work. So that was fantastic. But I also want to really express so much gratitude for the time and energy you all put into this work. I know there was a lot to read before our meetings. There was a lot of hours in council meetings and subcommittee meetings and all of those things. So just so grateful for everyone coming together and getting behind this movement that is just super exciting. I'm personally super excited about the potential collaboration with other EPPs and how we can support each other in making these shifts. I'm just excited about so much that can come from this incredible work. So thank you, Governor Kotek, for convening us, and thank you to all of you for all of your time and energy.
Thank you. So with that, you have an extra 4 minutes.
Well done, everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great facilitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.